And the really good news is I'm also short, so I don't have to adjust the microphone. So thank you, Kristen. Let's see, just a couple of things from me today. First of all, I want to say how great it is to see all of you here this, I guess, afternoon now here in the DC area. For those of you traveling in from out of the area, you get blessed with amazing fall weather in DC this week. You could have been here last week. I grew up in the deep South. I like heat and humidity, but if you don't, it was not a good week to be here in DC last week. So make sure you take a little bit of time to enjoy the trip to the Washington area in what's probably the best time of year to be in Washington. It's also a great time to be part of the cleanup program. And it's really nice to look around and see so many young faces who are interested in participating in a very important mission for our country. And this is a part of the remarks where I'll make a little bit of a sales pitch for the thing that you've already bought. But you know, sort of keep in mind as you think about your career development, I'm really making a sales pitch for why you want to stay in the program as well. The cleanup mission in this country is the largest environmental remediation program in the world. So it's, when you think about the size and scope of it, in corporate speak, I heard somebody once refer to a corporate order backlog, but in the EM program, we refer to it as our environmental liability. Our environmental liability, which is sort of a measure of the scope of work that we have to do around the country, is measured in the hundreds of billions of dollars. So at the moment, it's on the order of $400 billion. An enormous scope of work. At the moment, we're carrying it out at a pace of about $8 billion a year. So I suspect a lot of you are even better at math than I am, so you can do that math and realize that if you want a career in a cleanup program, you can have a career in the cleanup program for the rest of your career. So it's a great place to be from that perspective. It's also a really important program. If you think about what we're doing, we're cleaning up the legacy of some of the national security and energy research work over the last nearly 8 decades now that has meant so much to both the national security and the economic security of our country. Along with that really difficult and demanding work came an obligation for us to also deal with the legacy impacts of having done that work. I think the cleanup program is a symbol of the US government's commitment to the communities that hosted this really important work, that the government wouldn't just walk away when the work was done, but that we would be here to address that legacy as long as we would be needed to address that legacy. And so for those of you involved in the cleanup program, you have a lot of constituencies that are really depending on the work that you do. There's the national security missions moving forward, which really depend on us to, places like Y-12, for example, or Savannah River, that really depend on us to address the legacy of the past so that they can continue to move those national security missions forward. Same thing on the science and energy space, whether it's nuclear energy research in places like Idaho or some of the broader science missions at places like Oak Ridge. Those incredibly important missions depend on us also continuing to address the legacy of the past. The people who live around the communities where we have cleanup around the country are depending on the government to follow through on its obligations and ensure that they are protected from an environmental and health and safety perspective. No matter what you do in the cleanup program, the work that you do is extremely important. And from a mission perspective, whether you're doing HR or cyber or actually out in the field doing the cleanup work, all of those aspects of everything you do are really important to making the program itself move forward. And for those of you who are early career professionals, you have picked a really opportune time to be an early career professional in the program for a couple of reasons. One is the scope of the program continues to be what I laid out earlier, which means that it's going to be steady or growing for the foreseeable future for the extent of the careers for even the youngest people in the room now. The other thing that you might not know is over the last couple of decades, we've worked ourselves into a situation where our demographics are very interesting. On the federal workforce, for example, about half the people in the federal workforce are eligible to retire now, right? And if you look at what our curves look like from an age perspective, we are doing our very best, and you'll hear a lot about this afternoon and over the course of this week if you're participating in the workshop. We're doing our very best to bring people into the program at the moment, but there's a gap in the middle of the program. And so what this does for folks who are on the early career side is it creates an enormous set of opportunities for you to very rapidly advance your career in the cleanup program if you're willing to put forth the effort and motivation and demonstrate that you can actually be a part of that program and want to be a part of that program. So there's both an opportunity from an individual perspective, and there's a long-term continuing opportunity from a mission perspective to be a part of what I think of as one of the most important programs that we have in the US government. So that was my sales pitch for why you want to stay in the cleanup program. What folks actually asked me to talk about a little bit was to give you some career planning advice. And that one is kind of hard for me because for those of you who know me really well, and I see a couple of folks in the audience that I've known, like Kent there, for a very long time. We won't say how long, Kent. But one of the things that I am like notoriously bad at is career planning. As a matter of fact, I am so bad at career planning that I have never once planned to have any job that I have ever had in my entire career, starting with the one I have now, and going all the way back. When I was in high school, trying to figure out what I wanted to major in, I had not a clue. I decided to be electrical engineering, and for those of you who are math geeks, you'll appreciate this. I decided to major in electrical engineering because I'm good at math, right? And I wanted something easy. And so that was what I went for as an undergraduate degree, because I wanted something that was really centered around something that I was pretty good at. The things that I'm not good at, like communications, really aren't needed to get through engineering school. The whole time I spent in engineering school, I thought, well, maybe what I really want to be is a lawyer. And no offense to the lawyers in the room, but I was quickly sort of fell out of that notion. The first job that I took was with the US government. It was with the Defense Nuclear Facility Safety Board. I had never heard of the Defense Nuclear Facility Safety Board until my advisor, when I was a senior, said, hey, why don't you send these guys a resume? They have this great intern program. And I'm like, sure. So I handed him a copy of my resume, because when you're a senior in college, you have a stack of those ready to go at any time. And I never thought about it again until I got back from Christmas vacation and had a phone call on my answering machine. And for those of you who don't remember what an answering machine is, I won't take the time to explain that. But the phone call on my answering machine was from the Defense Board, wanting me to fly up the next day to Washington to interview for a position. And I'm like, well, I really ought to figure out what these guys do. So I spent the afternoon in the library at Ole Miss going through microfiche. And for those of you who don't know what that is, I won't bother to explain that either. But needless to say, that's where I ended up starting my career, mostly because they had a great intern program. They had a great early career program where you could not quite figure out what you wanted to do, but instead take advantage of a very structured set of graduate school, do a third-party job. I worked at Sandia National Laboratories for a year, went to grad school at Berkeley, and then came back and worked as a member of the staff. Then at some point in my career, the person who was my boss moved over to the Department of Energy. Somebody I had worked with was starting up a new office and said, hey, why don't you come over? So a couple of weeks after that, I had made the decision to move over to the National Nuclear Security Administration, mostly because I respected the people that I was going to be working with, because I knew them and had had a lot of experience working with them over the last decade or so. A lot of different positions inside of NNSA. I thought for most of my career that I would never, ever do jobs like the one I'm doing now. As a matter of fact, I used to look at people doing jobs like I'm doing now and think, oh no, like why would you ever want to do that in a government environment? It's a really difficult job. It focuses on a skill set that wasn't my biggest skill set. But then at some point, there are opportunities to make a difference, right? And then at some point you realize over the course of your career that what really matters to you is the ability to drive change and move the ship in the direction that you would like to see it go. And you have a choice between being willing to step up and be the person doing it yourself, or going along for the ride. And at some point I decided I didn't want to go along for the ride anymore, that I really wanted to be one of the folks deciding where the ship was going to go. And so that led to a series of career choices within NNSA, and eventually the career choice that I've taken now, where at some point in the last administration, the person who was the secretary made me an offer that I just couldn't refuse. For those of you old enough to remember the Godfather movies. So all of that to say, from a career planning perspective, the only advice I have for you is that I don't really have any great advice on how to plan your career. I've never actually managed to do that myself. I do have some good advice, though, on some things that make a difference as you go through the course of your career. Some things that had never occurred to me when I was at the point where I can suspect many of you are today. First of all, for those of you who are also engineering or science geeks, communications matter. Right? They matter a whole lot more than perhaps you wish they did. So the good news I've got for you is that you don't have to be great at it. You don't have to be the world's most charismatic speaker. You don't have to be the best communicator anybody has ever heard. But you do have to be able to communicate effectively and be able to get your points across concisely and be able to lobby for and advocate for whatever point it is that you're trying to communicate. One of my first bosses told me that it doesn't matter how smart you are, it doesn't matter how good your ideas are. If you can't effectively communicate those to other people, then you may as well not have had them in the first place. And that is a very true statement. So certainly encourage folks to think about how you improve your communication skills and looking for opportunities to do that. Second piece of advice is no matter what it is that you're doing right now, or no matter what it is that you think you might want to do in the future, always do the very best that you can do at whatever it is that you're doing now. The future will at some point take care of itself. The present also matters, and your relationships with other people and the reputation that you acquire in the industry matter, and a lot of that reputation is built on how well you do the thing that you're doing now. For those of us in a program like this, you think of the cleanup program and NNSA as, if you add them together, it's maybe about 100,000 people in the private and federal sector who make up those two mission spaces for the Department of Energy, maybe a little bit less. And that seems like a lot of people, except at some point after you've been to a few of the events like this, you realize that you know most of the people at the event, particularly the people who are in your age group. And so a lot of your reputation in groups like this is really built on how well that you do. Another thing that's really important as you're thinking about what you do from a career planning perspective is always be willing to step outside your comfort zone and accept the challenge and responsibility to do something that might not be exactly what you had in mind. There are a couple of different reasons for this. One, it's an opportunity to meet new people and build relationships and learn about some part of the program or the enterprise or your company or the government that maybe you didn't really know before. And for me, learning in my job is one of the things that is most important to me, that I actually really have to have in my job in order to be happy. I have to feel like I'm learning and growing, to really feel like I'm making a contribution, not just to the job and the mission, but also to myself. And so always look for opportunities like that. Stepping outside of your comfort zone, building those relationships, meeting people you haven't met, learning skill sets you haven't learned, all of those things can come from taking on opportunities that maybe wouldn't have been your first choice for a thing to do, but nevertheless can prove very influential for you over the course of your career. For me, the one really big turning point in my career, from being a safety professional, which was the first 20 years of my career, to being more of a general executive, was because I agreed to run an acquisition strategy for a procurement activity, right? And so for those of you in the safety business, the idea of running an acquisition strategy for procurement activity is probably not on the top of your list of things that you want to do. But I will say that what I learned about contracting and procurement and the business side of large government enterprises over the course of doing that probably means as much to me in my job now as the 20 years of safety experience that I acquired working on the technical side as well. So always look for opportunities to step outside your comfort zone and do things that allow you to grow and to learn. And so with that, I think I'm running close to the time. I see this little thing is turning yellow instead of green, which probably means that it's getting close to time for me to wrap it up. But I will wrap it up by offering, if anybody's got any questions, I am happy to take a couple of questions now. I told Marty I wouldn't do this, so apologies to Marty, wherever you are. But if there's anyone who does have questions, you're free to ask them. I've got 1 minute, 17 seconds left. Otherwise, I'll be here today, tomorrow, and Wednesday morning, and so always feel free to stop me on the sidelines and ask questions as well. I'm happy to take questions in that regard. The other thing I would leave you with is make sure that you actively participate this week. This is an incredible opportunity to learn from a lot of different folks and to meet a lot of different people that you haven't maybe had an opportunity to meet before. So make sure you take advantage of that this week, meet new people, learn new things. And I'm really glad you're in the cleanup program. I think it's a great place to be. I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't think the mission was extraordinarily important. It is something that means a lot, not just to the folks in this room, not just to the folks in this workshop, but to people who live in communities around the country from coast to coast. And I'm happy to have you all a part of it. Thank you.